my water just broke. I felt like things really intensified.
She was right there and she was coming.
It was an amazing feeling.
I'm gonna cry just thinking about it. I could feel her head.
We heard her cry. We were squeezing hands and she was screaming.
I'm Bryn Hunt Palmer, and you're listening to The Birth Hour. This podcast is designed as a safe place to come together and share childbirth stories. Stick around and join us to hear informative and empowering birth journeys from all over the world. If you're new to the Birth Hour, you may not know that we have an online childbirth course that is evidence-based. It includes 12 modules that take you from your final weeks of pregnancy through obviously preparing for birth and then postpartum and feeding your baby as well. And with enrollment in that course, which is called Know Your Options, you'll get free access to our other course called Beyond the First Latch, where we talk all about pumping, feeding baby, storing milk, going back to paid work if that's part of your plan, all of those things as well. Okay, so if you go to thebirthhour.com/course, you can see everything laid out in the course, module by module, as well as an FAQ section, which will hopefully answer some of your questions if you have any, things like how to get it covered by an FSA account and things like that. It also talks about the bonuses that come with the course, including bi-monthly Zoom calls and access to our private Facebook group. So again, that's thebirthhour.com/course. And you can use the coupon code 100OFF for $100 off enrollment as a podcast listener. We would also love to welcome you into our listener supporter group via Patreon. That's at patreon.com/birthhour. And by becoming a Patreon supporter, you get access to all of our archived episodes. This podcast launched in 2015, so we have over 800 episodes in the archives that are not in the main podcast feed. So you can get your fill of birth stories. And you'll also get access to our private Facebook group for Patreon members, which is a great place to honestly just to search the past posts to get answers to questions, but then of course to ask new questions, find community. It's a really, really great supportive group of people. So I highly recommend joining that. We would love to have you there. We also do monthly Zoom calls with our Patreon supporters, and you get an opportunity to enter your birth story via a different submission form than everyone else uses, and we choose 2 Patreon members each month to share their birth stories. So that is again at patreon.com/birthhour. Today's episode is brought to you by Air Doctor. Americans spend an average of 90% of their time indoors, but did you know that indoor air can be up to 100 times more polluted than outdoor air? You can breathe easy with Air Doctor, the award-winning air purifier that eliminates 99.99% of dangerous contaminants like allergens, viruses, smoke, gases, mold spores, and more. Air Doctor was voted Best Air Purifier by Newsweek, so it's no surprise that 98% of Air Doctor customers agree their home's air feels cleaner, safer, and healthier. Unlike other purifiers, Air Doctor captures invisible particles 100 times smaller than standard HEPA filters. We have air purifiers in our bedroom as well as the kids' bedrooms, and everyone has been sleeping better. I love how quiet the Air Doctor is. It's like the perfect amount of white noise. I would absolutely splurge on this for a nursery for baby. Like, get the cheap crib from IKEA and put your money towards this so that your baby has clean air in their nursery. We also have one in our living room, and I've noticed a huge difference after cooking and things like that. It just really clears the room really quickly. Head to airdoctorpro.com and use the promo code BIRTHHOUR to get up to $300 off today. Air Doctor comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee plus a 3-year warranty, which is an $84 value for free. You can get this exclusive podcast-only offer now at airdoctorpro.com, airdoctorpro.com, using the promo code BIRTHHOUR. Today's birth story guest is Molly, and she has a hospital induction to share with us. She also talks about genetic testing that she had to do during pregnancy, as well as some struggles with low milk supply postpartum. All right, let's hear from Molly. Hi, Molly. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. I know a little bit about your story already, but before we get to that, will you tell listeners a little bit about you and your family?
Sure. I live with my husband, Tony, and our 5-month-old daughter, Rosie Jo. And I recently finished my PhD in child, youth, and family studies. And I'm very passionate about child development, pregnancy, and childbirth. And we live in Omaha, Nebraska.
All right. And yeah, as I mentioned, you were a Know Your Options student and you were on a lot of the Zoom calls. So we got to know each other a little bit, which was fun. And I'm excited to have you here to share your story. And I know you have a lot from pregnancy, but do you have anything you want to share about getting pregnant, or where do you want to start?
Sure. I'm happy to start with getting pregnant.
Okay.
Tony and I got married in June of 2022. And I got off birth control a few months later in October and tracked my cycles with an ovulation predictor kit and the Pre-Mom app for a year before we started trying to conceive. And from this year, I figured out that I had very regular 28 to 32 day cycles. And by the end of the year, I could tell I was ovulating by my cervical mucus. And then before we started trying to conceive, I did genetic testing. And the results from the genetic testing came back as high reproductive risk. So I think you know this, but I'm a carrier for the Fragile X syndrome, which is a genetically inherited form of intellectual disability.
Right.
Fragile X is an X chromosome linked syndrome, and the inheritance is much more complex than other genetic diseases. So I'm a premutation carrier, which means that my future children may be at risk for the full mutation. And I have more repeats of a segment of DNA on a specific gene than is normal. So this was scary to learn this information. Mm-hmm. And then in addition to that, there's also some health challenges that can come with being a carrier for Fragile X. And one is primary ovarian insufficiency, which is a condition that can cause early menopause and infertility in women. So I went to an OBGYN and they tested my AMH and my FSH and both were normal. So we decided to try to move forward, trying to conceive naturally and plan to do more genetic testing while I was pregnant. So we established care with my OBGYN, Dr. Karen Carlson, at the beginning of January 2024 and had a preconception appointment. And my doctor worked at the same hospital as my husband, the University of Nebraska Medical Center. So that's why we chose that hospital. And we were very fortunate. We've had a lot of friends who have struggled with infertility, and we were very fortunate to conceive naturally. We tried for 3 months and got pregnant on the 3rd month.
Okay. And then you knew going into the pregnancy that you would be doing some extra testing and things like that, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go ahead and talk about how pregnancy went.
Yeah, I loved being pregnant. I had most of the typical symptoms. I found out I was pregnant on February 9th. So I wasn't very far along, only 3 weeks and 4 days. And then we had an appointment to confirm the pregnancy in March when I should have been 8 weeks. We went to the 8-week appointment and they told me that the embryo appeared to only be 7 weeks old based on the length of the measurements on the ultrasound. So my OBGYN adjusted my estimated due date from October 21st to October 27th. And that's around the time that I joined the Know Your Options course and started attending the biweekly Zoom calls.
Yeah. I remember getting that update about the due date. And we were like, actually, that could be a really good thing because it gives you more time at the end. Yeah.
Definitely. And then right away, we started interviewing doula candidates. And we interviewed doulas from 2 companies in Omaha. And Stephanie and Bryn, you on the BIRTHHOUR calls were really helpful to me because you helped me come up with some questions to ask our doula candidates. Mm-hmm. Like one helpful question was, how many clients do they have per month?
Yeah.
Because that can affect their scheduling. So we ended up hiring Amy Kelly from the Omaha Baby Nest, and she was a great doula. She texted me every Monday during my pregnancy and asked how I was feeling and doing, and I could text her with any questions that I had. And she also taught the childbirth education class at our hospital and came to our house to teach us spinning babies techniques.
Very cool.
Yeah. So now I can get into a little bit about the genetic testing that we did while I was pregnant.
Yeah.
So at 11 weeks, we did a chorionic villi sampling to see if the fetus had Fragile X. Chorionic villi sampling, or the abbreviation is CVS, is a prenatal test that checks for genetic abnormalities in a fetus by analyzing a tissue from the placenta. So the maternal fetal medicine doctors conducted the procedure, and I was awake the whole time, and my husband was able to stay in the room. They inserted a needle into my belly and uterus and took a sample of tissue from my placenta. I found it to be pretty painful, and we got the results back around 15 weeks. We found out that our daughter is also a premutation carrier for Fragile X, and she has more repeats on one of her X chromosomes than I do. So this has implications for her future children if she decides to reproduce, but she's healthy as a carrier.
So it took about 4 weeks to get the results?
Yeah, about 4 weeks to get the results.
Okay, yeah, I remember you talking about that on the calls, and it just felt like such a long wait.
Definitely, yeah, and it was a relief once we knew.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So that got you to, I guess, second trimester. How did the rest of your pregnancy go?
So at the beginning of my second trimester, we told our family and friends that we were expecting. It was kind of a whirlwind of a week. I flew home from an academic conference for work on Sunday. We told all of our friends and family we were expecting. Then the next day, I defended my doctoral dissertation.
Oh my gosh.
And told all my professional colleagues that I was expecting. And after all of that, I got sick and stayed in bed for 3 days straight. And I had the flu.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Your body's like, and I'm done.
Exactly. I overdid it. And so I called my OB's office and they just said, sickness can linger while you're pregnant. But luckily that passed. Another thing for my second trimester is that I started pelvic floor physical therapy at the Pelvic Physio at Rockbrook Village in Omaha, because I was experiencing some urinary incontinence. And I was so fortunate to go to pelvic floor physical therapy weekly during my pregnancy and postpartum, and it was covered by my insurance. I had the best experience, and I want to give a shout out to my physical therapist, McKenna, who's been an incredible source of support. Just a couple more things. 28 weeks pregnant, I was working from home and I fell off my yoga ball. I was nervous because I didn't feel any fetal movement for an hour. So I went to the hospital and I had to stay on the monitors in triage for 6 hours. And they took a blood test to make sure I didn't have any issues with my placenta. And luckily there were not any issues and I was able to go home and continue my pregnancy as usual. Finally, I felt very strong, beautiful, and even warrior-like at the end of my pregnancy. I used the Apple Watch movement rings, and I closed my movement ring on my Apple Watch for 53 days straight, with the last day being the day before I delivered.
Wow.
I was really proud of that.
Yeah.
And haven't done that for that long since. So
you had that burst of energy at the end there.
Definitely. And I also practiced yoga until the last week of my pregnancy.
All right. So does that bring us to talking about the birth?
Yeah, I have a couple notes about how I planned for my birth.
Okay, great.
So when I was in college, I took a class about natural childbirth. And the class was taught by a midwife, and we watched The Business of Being Born.
Wow, so cool.
Yeah, it was so amazing. I have such fond memories of the class. I did my final project on a hypnobirthing, so it was such a fascinating class.
Yeah.
The class really sparked my interest in unmedicated childbirth, and then my hope was to have an unmedicated hospital birth with the support of a doula. And in conversations in my prenatal appointments, my doctor was mostly supportive of my plan. So during my third trimester appointments, my OB wanted me to put an induction date on the calendar, even though she knew I wanted to go into labor spontaneously. But she said that would still be the best to put a date on the calendar. So this irritated me, so I had the backup plan to be induced 8 days after my due date. I would have been 41 weeks in 1 day. And with that induction plan, I had planned to have a Foley bulb and no cytotecocervidil. And my doctor said I could even have the Foley bulb inserted in the evening in the hospital, go home, and return to the hospital in the morning to start the induction. So if I were to have an induction, that was kind of the plan. And I just mentioned this because it kind of comes up again later. And then I had 2 friends who had positive birth experiences at the hospital that I picked. And my husband, he still works there. My hospital had one of the best NICUs in the city, a level 3 NICU, which I found to be very reassuring.
All right. So how did labor start?
Okay. So I really wanted to induce labor naturally. My 39th week of pregnancy, I walked 32 miles, including 3 miles per day and 1 6-mile walk around a lake. And I did gentle and yin yoga. I got a pedicure because one of my friends suggested a foot massage could induce labor. And I did acupuncture. I drank red raspberry leaf tea, 8 dates, curb walked, pumped with my Spectra breast pump, and had sex with my husband. I was having Braxton Hicks contractions, but our running joke was that they were coming about every 12 hours. So wasn't quite going into labor on my own yet. And then at 39 weeks and 3 days, which was a Wednesday, my feet felt really itchy at night. And it happened again a second night on Thursday. So Friday, when I was 39 weeks and 5 days, I went on a walk with my mom, and we were walking up a big hill near our houses. And I had called my doctor's office earlier in the day to tell them about my itchy feet. And during the walk, the nurse returned my phone call and said, out of an abundance of caution, you need to come into the clinic for a blood draw. So we got home from the walk about 4:30, and my husband drove me to the clinic for the blood draw at 5 p.m. Then we went out to dinner with my grandma at a ramen noodle spot. And at the dinner, I got a notification on my phone that my blood test results were posted on the online portal OneChart. And I immediately opened them and saw that my liver numbers were off. I had elevated liver enzymes. So I was worried, and I showed my husband the numbers on the phone during the dinner. And after dinner, we curb walked at the complex by the restaurant. And I had a feeling at this point that my doctor was going to recommend an induction. And I was doing everything in my power to kickstart labor naturally. My parents and my husband and I are neighbors. So after the dinner, we went over to my parents' house. And then I was feeling very anxious about my blood numbers. So I called the after hours hotline at my OBGYN clinic. And they forwarded the question along to the labor and delivery triage nurse, who called the on-call resident. And the resident recommended I come into the hospital because of my elevated liver enzymes. This all happened about 9 p.m. And we told the folks at labor and delivery that we could be there in about an hour. We went back to our house, packed up our final items in our hospital bags, and called my doula, Amy, to update her on the situation. Then on the way to the hospital, I felt very nervous and anxious. And my husband tried to help me relax by saying that they may let me go home tonight. When we got to the hospital, we did not go to triage, and they sent me straight to a labor and delivery room. Meanwhile, I got a message on the online portal from my regular OB, Dr. Carlson, who was not working that night. She said, your liver function tests are elevated. With the itching, you likely have cholestasis of pregnancy, which is an indication for delivery. Then between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m., several doctors and nurses came into our hospital room, and it was challenging to get any rest. Someone even came into our room to check the temperature of the refrigerator. A family practice resident gave me an ultrasound to confirm that the baby was head down. He said they may give me medication to lower my liver enzymes and send me home, but he was not sure. A nurse came in and put a hep block to administer medication in case of an emergency. I had in my birth plan, I wanted to have a hep block because I wanted to have Pitocin in my immediate postpartum to prevent hemorrhage. Then around 4 a.m., the OB resident on call came into the room with several doctors and nurses, and they woke me up out of a pretty deep sleep, and it was very disorienting. She told me that I would need to be induced. They suspected I had cholestasis of pregnancy based on my elevated liver enzymes, and they ordered a bile acid levels test to confirm the diagnosis, but it would take 3 days to come back, and they thought the best course of action was an induction. And I was crying. I was like, I really don't want to be induced.
Yeah.
I wanted to labor at home. I wanted to go into labor naturally. And my husband hugged me, and he said he was so sorry that my birth was not going according to my birth plan. So the resident suggested that the induction could start with a cervical ripening balloon and cytotech. But based on the plans that I had set up with my original provider, I wondered if I could do the Foley bulb or the Cook catheter without the cytotech. And I asked the doctor if I could have 5 minutes to call my doula to kind of talk through options. And I spoke with my doula on the phone, and we decided to go forward with both the cytotech and the Cook catheter. And the resident came back in to check me and started the induction. I also wanted to stop here and say that the hospital did an incredible job. Every provider was very explicit and asked me for consent whenever they checked me or touched my vagina. They would say something like, I'm going to check your cervical dilation now. Is that okay with you? And then they would say, I'm touching your right thigh. I'm touching your left thigh. I'm checking you now. And that consent language gave me a lot of peace of mind.
Good.
I liked being walked through the process so transparently.
Yeah.
And it didn't feel violating or painful to be checked.
That's good.
Yeah.
Should be common practice, but we know from this podcast it's not always.
Yeah. So the first time I was checked was at 4:05 a.m. and I was 60% effaced, 1 centimeter dilated and -3 station. And the resident said, that's a good place to start an induction. She said lots of first-time moms come in with a stiff, closed cervix. She said I wasn't starting from zero. And I took this to mean that my body had been preparing to go into labor on its own, and maybe some of the natural methods that I tried to induce labor had worked. So they inserted the Cook catheter, and I do not remember that being painful. So that brings me to my early labor. After that, I couldn't fall back asleep. My husband was sleeping on the couch, and I listened to Broadway show tunes with my headphones on and sat on the toilet and took selfies in the mirror. if you look at my camera roll, it goes straight from these selfies to like the video of the birth. So
things picked up quickly after that.
Yeah. And then in early labor, the nurse gave me the Purse mobile fetal monitor so I could move freely throughout the room and the hallway. And I got excited that I was in labor. And then in the early morning around 5 a.m., I could see that I was having regular contractions on the monitor screen. And I could also see the other women on the labor and delivery floor based on their room number. It didn't have their name. But I could see when they were having contractions on the monitor. And it reminded me of the Peloton leaderboard tracking everyone's workout.
I have not heard that before. That's so interesting.
Yeah. So that was funny. And I had some mild to moderate back pain, and I rested with the peanut ball in between my legs. I sat on the toilet with my head leaned against a raised surface, and I stood leaning over the sink. My doula came in at about 8 a.m. She was teaching a childbirth education class at our hospital on the same day I was in labor. It was a Saturday, and the class went from 9 a.m. to noon. So before the class, Amy, my doula, came and shared with us some movements that I could be doing. She said I could do a restful posture for 30 minutes and then an active posture, like walking the halls for 30 minutes and alternate between them. She also showed us how to elevate the bed and sit on the yoga ball. And after she came by, I walked the halls in the hospital from 8:39 until 9:06. Because I could see on my watch. And I saw the attending physician in the hallway, and she introduced herself. Her name was Dr. Mary Kenyon, and my regular OB was not working that day. So I had not planned to have my mom in the room during my labor and delivery, but as soon as I was in labor, I changed my mind, and I wanted her there. So she came around 9 a.m. and brought some snacks and comfort items from home that we forgot, string cheese, my squatty potty, and frozen grapes. And my husband called the hospital cafeteria and ordered some eggs. And my mom brought me cottage cheese and jelly from home. So I was able to eat little bits of these things. Then the anesthesiologist came into my room for a consultation. I was still in early labor. In our birth preferences planning meeting earlier that month, my doula told me that I could refuse the consultation with the anesthesiologist. She said kind of if they come in, they meet with you and they say the word epidural, it might plant the seed in your head. And I was certain I didn't want to have an epidural. And so when we saw the anesthesiologist, I said, "We don't want you here." And he said, "Should I come back later?" And my husband doubled down and said no. So that was that interaction, and we didn't see him again. Then the nurse removed the Cook catheter at 9:42 a.m., and I was leaning over the side of the bed, and it slid right out. My husband was surprised because it was the size of 2 pool balls. Then my nurse, Bree, said to me, "Okay, the next step in the induction is going to be we're either going to give you Pitocin or we're going to break your water." And I was like, "Oh, I really don't want either one of those things." And she said, "Okay, well, I'll try to go to the nurse's station and advocate for you to get a little bit more time to progress on your own because you're contracting regularly." And I was like, "Okay, thank you." And then right after that, she left the room, and it was 10:10 a.m. And I laid down in a restful position with the peanut ball. And my water broke on its own, which was amazing. My husband, Tony, was in the bathroom, the little bathroom that's right off the room. And my mom was there. And my mom rushed over to me and was like, "Are you okay?" And I was shocked. And I was thinking, what's going on? It started to hurt right away. And when my water broke, I felt the pop like a balloon, and it was higher up in my belly than I expected. So that brings me to active labor. And almost immediately when my water broke, I was in active labor. It took the doctor a while to get there. Dr. Kenyon came in at 11:50 and checked me. I was 4 centimeters dilated, 90% effaced, and 0 station. The doctor confirmed that my water had broken. The chart said spontaneous rupture of membranes, clear fluid confirmed. My doula was still not there, and we considered having her backup doula come to support me for a while, but that didn't end up happening. Bree, my nurse, handed off her other patients because it was clear that I was in active labor. So that's something really nice that they have at our hospital, was that once a patient is in active labor, they try to just have one nurse assigned to each patient. Bree did a lot of hip squeezes because I had back labor, and I wanted hip squeezes with every contraction. I liked the way that Bree did the counter pressure best, more than the doula or my husband. My doula later told me, Yeah. My doula later told me it was a different type of back squeeze than most women like. It was higher up on my back. And when my husband tried to do the counter pressure, I said, no, you're not doing it right. Yeah. And then I tried to get in the tub during active labor, and I had one contraction, but it was so painful without the back counter pressure. I really didn't like it, and I was uncomfortable in the tub. Then my doula, Amy, arrived right after noon when I was in the tub, and my bra got soaking wet, and everyone helped me get out of the bath and dry it off before my next contraction started. My mom got another bra out of my hospital bag, and someone commented that they liked my bras. That was memorable. And both were nursing bras. Yeah, both were nursing bras from Target. So my doula and my nurse kept telling me to go pee at this point, and I could not go pee no matter what. I tried sitting on the toilet, and I even tried peeing in the shower because I'd heard other women on the podcast have success peeing in the shower, but I wasn't able to go pee while I was in labor. And then from noon until 4:30 p.m., I was in active labor, and this part of my memory is the haziest. I started to have contractions every 2 minutes on my own without Pitocin, and it was a lot. Some things I remember about active labor were that I switched positions often, every 30 minutes or so, and I laid with my ankles open on the peanut ball to try to help the baby drop in station. And I sat on the toilet backwards a lot. That was probably my favorite position, one of my favorites, sitting on the toilet backwards with a pillow in front of me pressed against the commercial toilet flush valve. I wore an eye mask, which helped me block out distractions and stay in labor land. Between contractions, I really did not want to make small talk or even hear others in the room make small talk. My husband and my mom were talking about the score of the Nebraska football game, and I directly asked them to stop talking. My mom said that everyone stopped talking after that or only spoke in hushed tones. And one of my yoga teachers suggested that I try to treat each break between contractions as a mini shavasana. So I really tried that to relax between each contraction. My doula and nurse kept asking me how I was feeling between contractions, and I said it hurt, and they would ask me where it hurt or how it hurt, which would inform how they picked the next position or how to offer counter pressure. I held a wooden comb during all of my contractions in active labor and transition. My husband said the comb was the best $10 I ever spent. In active labor, I also returned multiple times to the throne position in the bed, sitting upright. This position puts direct pressure on the cervix. And when I was in this position, my mom rubbed lotion on my legs during my contractions, and my doula pushed my knees into the back of the bed to flatten out my back. And I remember the throne position being one of the more comfortable positions and more relaxing positions. I also wore ice packs on my back for all of active labor and transition. So at 3:39, Bree, my nurse, checked me, and I was 7 centimeters dilated, 90% effaced, and 0 station. And in my chart, the nurse wrote, "The patient is doing well. Patient is thrilled about advanced cervical dilation." So when I was 7 centimeters dilated, I knew transition was coming, and I was trying to get mentally prepared for it. Tony was Googling, how long does it take to get from a 7 to a 10? And he knew transition was coming too, and that the baby was going to come tonight. I looked at the clock, and I saw that it was almost 4 p.m., and I thought, maybe if I have this baby before it's too late, then my dad and my sister, or even maybe my grandparents, can come to the hospital tonight, and we can have dinner from my favorite takeout spot. So I remember that being motivating when I looked at the clock.
Planning ahead. I like it.
Yeah. And then this brings me to transition. Bree, my nurse, came in at 4:30 and said the nurses at the nurses station noticed heart decelerations on the monitor, which could indicate that I was nearing transition. So I went in the shower, and that was really intense. I stood in the shower and held the safety bar, and my mom and Tony were spraying water on my back. And then I had a towel on my back, and they were doing counter pressure on my back, and I was still grabbing my comb. An important part of the shower was when I started to vocalize, I want to go home. I don't want to have another contraction. I just want a break. I want this to end. I was also moaning, and my doula and the nurse were reminding me to vocalize in low-pitched moans and groans. So the low pitch really helped me. And after a while, my doula said to me, try to squat. I thought of doing like a deep squat, like a Malasana squat in yoga. And I said, I can't. But then I did a subtle goddess squat and I could feel the baby drop really far down. And it was crazy, that feeling. Then they told me it was going to be time to push. We went back over to the bed and I was like, I don't want to push for 4 hours. I want to wait because I think I had wanted to labor down a little bit, but I felt like they didn't give me much of a choice. My knees started shaking, like knocking together. And I distinctly remember feeling the shakes happen 3 times. And then at 5:27 p.m., my nurse checked me and I was 10 centimeters dilated, 100% efface and +1 station. My mom noticed that at this point, my contractions seemed to slow down, and that was pretty shocking to her. And she thought it was good because I started to have longer breaks between my contractions. Then I started pushing. So I started doing practice pushing with Bree, my nurse, and Amy, my doula. And at first, my natural instinct was to grab onto the railings of the bed. But Amy advised me against that because she said my energy was going into my arms instead of out towards my groin. And then I wanted to press my hands into my legs. But similarly, Amy said that would be a counterproductive use of energy. So they told me to hold my own legs back, but that wasn't good for me. So I ended up having Amy hold one leg and Tony hold the other leg. And then I held hands with them underneath my legs for leverage. They kept telling me to relax my quads, which felt pretty tense from all of the active postures I did during labor. Then they set up the bed tug-of-war style using the labor bar with a sheet. That allowed me to relax my thighs and figure out the correct muscles for pushing. They also brought in a mirror for me to see my pushes. And then they were like, do you want to touch her head? And I could see a little bit of her head in the mirror. And at this point, I was still pushing with the nurse and my doula, and the doctor wasn't there yet. And then at one point, they were like, okay, we need to call the doctor in. And at 6:21 p.m., 3 doctors came in, Dr. Kenyon, the resident, and the pediatrician. I gave birth at an academic university hospital, and usually there's lots of medical students around, but it was a Saturday, so there weren't any students, which I think was a good thing. And at this point, I was directing people a lot. I was like, I need perineum support. I need a warm compress. A lot of the things that I learned from the course. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to avoid tearing. My anus looked gray and large. I pooped several times, and the nurse wiped it away. And someone commented about the baby, look at all of that dark hair. And everyone was very supportive while I was pushing with lots of positive affirmations, like, beautiful, just like that. You've got this, Molly. Words of affirmation is my love language. So I loved that. And the doctor suggested that I do shorter pushes, like 3 seconds long, once the baby's head was partially out. She said, take a breath, let it stretch. And then that contraction ended. So I waited in between contractions with a big part of the baby's head out. Someone said, well, that's good. That's going to stretch you. And I thought, I'm just going to try to trust you. And I said, she's part of the way out. And my doula said, next contraction, girl. Someone even said, you have a nectarine size amount of baby head out.
Wow, quite the visual.
Yeah. Yeah, then someone else actually said, like, she's never going to think of a nectarine in the same way.
True, yeah.
So they said, come on, mama, come on, Molly, let's meet her. And the doctor counted 1, 2, 3, breathe. And breathe actually meant stop pushing. She told me that when she came in, that breathe meant stop pushing. So I was doing pretty short pushes. And the doctor said, I see her nose. She's hanging on by her ears. Not yet. Do another push, Mall. And I pushed again, even though I felt like my contraction was over at that point. The doctor said, now we've got her. And the head and the rest of her body slid out. And I screamed in a higher pitch scream when the rest of the head and the body came out because I felt the ring of fire. And they put her on my chest. And I said, oh, my God. And they said she had a short umbilical cord. So our baby was born at 6:45 p.m. after approximately 14 hours of labor and 7 hours of active labor. I was so proud of myself for giving birth without Pitocin or an epidural. And I felt better immediately after she came out. We named her Rosie Joe, and her APGAR scores were 8 and 9. And we had delayed cord clamping. And after 3 minutes, my husband, Tony, cut the cord. I had 2 first-degree tears, one on my perineum and one near my urethra, and neither tear required stitches. We had almost 2-hour-long golden hour for skin to skin before they took her to the warmer or weighed her or anything. And during that golden hour, my doula helped us establish breastfeeding for the first time right after the delivery. And then my dad and my sister came to the hospital, and they brought us Mediterranean food takeout, and we all ate dinner together in the delivery room. So that's the birth.
Okay. So how did you feel about everything kind of immediately after? Talk about your recovery, but also just kind of how you processed your birth.
Yeah, I felt really good. I was really happy with how everything went, and I wasn't able to labor at home like I planned initially, but I was really happy with how all the phases of early labor, active labor, transition, and pushing all those pieces went. And I also birthed my placenta without any problems. And so.
Oh, good. Yeah, it seems like you had a really great support team too.
They were incredible. And we got pictures of everybody together afterwards.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So how was your recovery and then postpartum at home as well?
Yeah. So in my immediate postpartum at the hospital, I tried to pee when I was still in labor and delivery, and then pee when I was, they moved me over to the postpartum unit, and I still couldn't go pee. So they took an ultrasound of my bladder, and they said, there's a lot of pee in there. And so I had to have a catheter, and I had 1 liter of urine removed, but it wasn't a big deal. And then Rosie's temperature dropped. So she was brought to the warmer twice in the first night. And they said if her temperature dropped a 3rd time, she would have had to go to the NICU. But we were able to keep her warm with skin to skin. And then Rosie also had to have her bilirubin levels checked with a foot prick. And that was really hard for me as like a brand new mom to hear her crying when they took the foot prick a couple times. And the postpartum nurses and lactation consultants at the hospital were very warm and compassionate. And then while I was still in the hospital, my bile acid test came back to test for cholestasis, and my bile acids were normal, which meant that I didn't have cholestasis of pregnancy, which is good.
Yeah, that's interesting. Did they have any kind of explanation for why you were showing symptoms of that in late pregnancy?
I think they just weren't sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, it takes forever to get those results. So it's safer to just deliver. Most stories I've heard, it does end up that the person had it. So that's interesting.
Yeah. And I've heard that if you do have cholestasis, it has implications for when they want to set an induction date for the following births or birth.
Oh, okay.
And so I was kind of relieved that I didn't end up having it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. And then in my longer term postpartum, I had planned to exclusively breastfeed. During my pregnancy, my husband and I took an in-person breastfeeding class at Milkworks in Omaha, and I met with the lactation consultant at 37 weeks to make a plan. My dream was to be able to effortlessly breastfeed while holding the baby and walking up and down the stairs. I thought maybe I would have some pain initially or trouble with the latch, but I never thought I would have very low milk supply like I do. So we found out that Rosie was not transferring any milk in weighted feeds at 3 days postpartum when we were at the pediatrician's office. So at 3 days postpartum, I started triple feeding, offering the breast, supplementing with formula or donor milk, and pumping. And then we saw the pediatrician or lactation consultant almost every day for her first week of life. I also rushed to the endocrinologist to figure out if my thyroid was causing problems with breastfeeding. And we had a long, extended triple feeding journey, about 3 months long. So now I'm able to produce 10 to 20% of Rosie's daily calories. And I found out I have asymmetrical breasts and some signs of insufficient glandular tissue, IGT. So I'm 5 months postpartum now, and we still supplement with donor milk. We have an incredible milk donor who is an oversupplier and has a baby about a month older than Rosie. And she brings us hundreds of ounces of milk like once a month. So it's incredible that we're still able to provide her with human milk, which was my hope.
Yeah.
And I still breastfeed also, and I still pump. I've also gotten a lot of support from the Mom Talk breastfeeding support group at Milkworks in Omaha. It meets every Tuesday morning, as well as multiple local lactation consultants. So related to my breastfeeding journey, I have Hashimoto's, a thyroid condition, and I've had a postpartum thyroiditis at 4 months postpartum. And I work with an endocrinologist and have frequent blood draws and changes to my synthroid hormone replacement dosage to optimize my TSH levels, because TSH can be related to breastfeeding.
Interesting.
Yeah, I've done a lot of thinking about this, and when you're pumping for hours a day and whatnot and breastfeeding,
Yeah.
I think about it all the time. And I think it's okay for me to mourn the breastfeeding relationship that I hoped for while also appreciating the one that we have. And I try to remember that any amount of breast milk counts, and the benefits of breastfeeding are not dose dependent. Also, non-nutritive sucking can be very bonding and comforting. So Rosie's got a little cold right now, and she's just like really happy, side-lying, breastfeeding, just getting comfort from me. And overall, now that I'm 5 months postpartum, it's been really important to remember that postpartum healing is gradual. I feel good, but there's ways in which I'm still in my healing process, and I'm just being patient with myself.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. 5 months, you're still very much in it for sure.
Yeah. And we're so happy. Like Rosie is a smiley and happy baby.
Aww.
And I'm so fortunate to be a mom.
Yeah. Yeah. You guys are always so cute when you are on the Zoom calls.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, resources you want to share?
Yeah. So I have a lot of local resources, some that I've mentioned throughout, but first, the Pelvic Physio. It's a woman-owned pelvic floor physical therapy clinic in Omaha, Nebraska. And then Milkworks. It's a breastfeeding nonprofit in Omaha and Lincoln, Nebraska. And then Facebook groups for donor milk. This is where I found our consistent donor, but I also had a couple other donors before her. Omaha area's local breastfeeding exchange is one of the Facebook groups, and the other is Nebraska Eats on Feeds. And Eats on Feeds has other Facebook groups in other states also.
Yeah. Yeah. Those Facebook groups are so helpful.
So helpful. I think when my lactation consultant told me that donor milk was going to be an option for me, it lifted a big burden off my shoulders. I felt really relieved. And you can get pasteurized donor milk, but it's very expensive. I think it's $3 an ounce where we are, but getting donor milk from a donor is either free or just a lot less expensive. And you can ask them a whole bunch of questions like what medications they take or if they drink coffee or things like that, and try to build a relationship with someone that you trust. And that's how I feel about our donor. I have just such warm feelings toward her.
Yeah. And I feel like if you're the one that's like an overproducer, it's really a great feeling for you too, to not be just throwing it away or letting it sit in the freezer or whatever.
Oh, totally. Sometimes our donor is the one who contacts me and she'll say, our freezer's full. Can you come?
Yeah.
Or can you take some?
Yeah.
So it's a really nice thing to have. And then another Facebook group that I'm in is a IGT and low milk supply support group. Other people who have struggles with supply issues. And then the Know Your Options childbirth course Zoom calls, obviously, are great.
Oh, good. Yes, we love the Zoom calls. I wish everybody would join them. We have so many students and a lot of people don't take advantage of them. So if you're in the course and you haven't checked out a Zoom call, it's a good time and a great reason to join the course too. So thanks, Molly.
Yeah. And then I have 2 books. The first book, Mayo Clinic's Guide to a Healthy Pregnancy. I read this whole book before I got pregnant, and it was a wonderful overview with a straightforward, non-judgmental tone. And then the second book, Babies Are Not Pizzas, They're Born, Not Delivered, Rebecca Decker's book. And she's the founder of Evidence-Based Birth. And this book was especially relevant for me because I was finishing my PhD journey preparing to be a first-time mom and navigating a non-traditional career outside of academia like Rebecca. I really enjoyed that book. Mm-hmm. And then finally, the YouTube channel, The Doctors Bjorkman, which is 2 doctors, and they share evidence-based medical studies and their experiences raising 3 children.
Okay, yeah, that's a new one to me. So we'll link to those. And then what's the best way for people to connect with you?
I think the best way to contact me is via email, and I can leave my email on the show notes page.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, Molly, this was so great to get your story recorded and connect with you. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a dream of mine for a long time.
Thank you so much again to Molly for sharing her story with us. If you want more information from her episode, including her list of resources and her contact info, head over to thebirthhour.com and just search for her name in the search bar. And then if you're interested in joining our Know Your Options Childbirth course, I will link to that in the show notes as well as in the app where you're listening to this episode, as well as the link to join our Patreon. All right, thanks guys, and see you next week.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, head to thebirthhour.com and click Become a Member to pledge your support. And as a thank you, you'll get an invitation to join our private Facebook group and access to exclusive episodes. Your vote of confidence and support means the world to me.